Thank you, everyone, for your patience today. I'm going to call the meeting of the city's growth committee open session to order for December 22nd. Can I get an approval of the minutes from September 27th? Councillor Harris and Mayor Reardon. On the question, all those in favor, say aye. Thank you. I'd like to see an approval of the agenda today. Mayor Reardon and Deputy Mayor McKenzie. On the question, all those in favor. All right, thank you. Are there any disclosures of interest, conflict of interest today? Okay, we're all good. Moving on, I need someone to move the consent agenda. 5-1, Mayor Reardon and Deputy Mayor McKenzie. On the question, all those in favor? Okay, motion carried. Moving on to our first item of the day, item 6.1, community standards compliance with Director Poffenroff. Oh, sorry. We're going to start with Commissioner Hamilton first. Thanks.
Good afternoon, members of Growth Committee. I'm pleased to introduce Amy Poffenroff, our Director of Permitting Inspections, who is here today to provide an update on the outcomes achieved through the city's suite of property-related compliance programs. As committee is aware, these programs are very much tied to driving the growth agenda in St. John and creating really the conditions for investment. And the results that we're sharing today really showcase some of the many success stories that we continue to drive forward to improve the livability of St. John's neighborhoods. And this presentation will provide important background to the committee as you move on to consider enhancements to your suite of compliance programs, which are the next item on the committee's agenda. And with that, I will turn things over to Ms. Poffenroff.
Is not quite right, but it should be on the screen. It's not. There it is. Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this afternoon, I want to just take an opportunity to briefly go over the city's community standards program and to update the committee on the successes that we've had with these important programs. The community standards compliance team is made up of 5 people. We have 2 managers. Ben Purinton manages the vacant and dangerous building program. Pamela Bentley manages the program overall. And we have 3 inspectors, 2 that focus most of their time on minimum standards and vacant buildings. And we have a community standards officer that deals with community standards compliance, some other bylaws, which we will go over. So first, I'm going to go over the dangerous and vacant building program and at a high level. In the next presentation, Ben Purinton is going to be talking about the future of the program with a series of recommendations for a growth committee to consider. In the mid-2000s, St. John led the way, advocating for legislative change to better address dangerous and vacant buildings in the city. This advocacy effort resulted in new, progressive legislation that allowed the city to successfully move forward in addressing dangerous buildings. Subsequent advocacy, again in 2012, further enhanced the legislation, which resulted in the successful program that we have today. On average, we resolve 60 cases every year. What's really notable is that of those resolved cases, 2/3 of them are actually repaired and reoccupied. And then only 1/3 of those are demolished, usually about half city-initiated demolitions, and the other half would be demolished by the owners. But overall, we have high compliance rates. About 85% of our cases, we do achieve compliance either through repair and reoccupancy or demolition. In 2018, we had a high number of cases, about 220, and today we are at about 140 or so cases. So I'm just going to walk you through a couple examples of success stories that we've had. I mean, this could be a lot longer if I went over all the buildings that we've had success with, but just to give you a snapshot of a few. 1-3 Charlotte Street is a property that we're happy about how it ended up. It was a vacant building that it was in disrepair. It was vacant for a number of years. The owner at the time didn't want to sell it, but he wasn't ready to do anything with the building. So this is a case where once we issued a notice to comply, this sort of got the owner thinking that he had to do something different. At that point, he sold the building, and it was purchased by a new owner and redeveloped. Today, it's a mixed-use building, commercial on the ground floor with residential units above, in a very key corner of our city. Talking about the north end for a second, since about 2017, there were about 25 demolitions of vacant buildings in the north end. And that was a combination of city-initiated demolition as well as owner demolitions because these buildings were hazardous to public safety. There have also been success stories of land that was converted to infill housing for new affordable housing as a result of some of these demolitions that we undertook in the north end. Here's a building on the west side of the city on Quinton Avenue. It was vacant for the last couple of years. Again, the owner wasn't really moving forward on this building until we indicated that we were going to issue a notice. Once we made that indication to the owner, they did decide to sell it. And they went through our developer notification system. And this helped the owner reach a group of interested developers. And as a result, the building was sold and repaired and reoccupied. Here's an example in the north end on Breen Lane. It had been vacant since 2010. It was in severe dilapidation and disrepair. And again, knowing that a notice to comply was coming, it caused the owner to sell, and the result is that the building has been successfully renovated and reoccupied this year. So, when you think about notice to comply, sometimes this prompts an owner to take action, and without us having to take action, which is great news. So over the past 5 years or so, there has been a large decrease in the number of vacant and dangerous buildings where the conditions are for hazardous buildings. Presently, those buildings are vacant but aren't considered a hazard to public safety, and nearly all are salvageable. In 2017, the number of hazardous buildings was considerably higher. Staff has made tremendous progress resolving the number of these types of buildings. But this indicates that the vacant building program has to evolve, and that's where we are today. And you're going to hear more about with Ben Purinton's presentation and talking about what the future of this program is, or what it could be. Next, moving on to Minimum Property Standards Program. This is a program that's been in place since the 1980s. And again, in the mid-2000s, in conjunction with advocacy around dangerous and vacant buildings, enhanced legislation facilitated improvements to the program, including increased fines in the case of noncompliance. As a result, once we did have to take these buildings to a more formal enforcement action, we saw strong support from the courts and higher fines being issued. In one case, a non-compliant property owner actually served jail time. So the courts definitely are supporting us in our efforts here. And once these actions are taking place, once we have some of this information out there that we are taking these things quite seriously, property owners take notice and they do begin to repair and make improvements to their buildings as a result of our intervention. So we have quite high rates of voluntary compliance with this program. Here's just a list of the typical things that our minimum standards inspectors look for, and our bylaw consists of the adoption of a provincial standard around occupied dwellings, and we have some of our own city standards that's in our bylaw. So we address safe exiting, fire separations, guards and handrails, things such as heat and that the unit is in good shape. There's quite a wide range of things that we look for. So with minimum property standards, on average, we have about 30 to 40 new cases every year, and they typically come from complaints from either tenants or the general public and other agencies, including ourselves and our fire prevention team. About 35 cases are resolved every year, and as I mentioned, we have 2 dedicated building inspectors that work mainly on this program and the vacant building program. We issue about 3 to 5 orders to comply every year, and we lay 2 to 3 charges per year in provincial court. So if you think about, if we're issuing 3 to 5 orders, but we're getting 35 cases resolved, this means that we're getting quite high rates of voluntary compliance. Currently, there's about 160 cases of minimum standards files. Next, I'll move to our community standards program. And this includes a variety of bylaw compliance, including unsightly premise, zoning standards, and other things such as pits and quarries and dog control bylaw, among other bylaws. So when a property owner doesn't comply with timelines set out by our community standards officer, we issue a notice to comply. And in, I think it's 95% of cases, the owners comply with our asks. But if they don't comply, as you can see in one of these pictures, we will arrange for the cleanup by city crews or by a third party, whatever happens to be the case in certain circumstances. So for unsightly premise, these are the things that we look for. The definition of unsightly, or what the items are, is actually in the legislation, and there are things that aren't considered unsightly, although we ourselves may feel differently. Things like overgrown lawns and weeds aren't actually included in the definition of unsightly, for instance. So we resolve a very high number of cases every year in this program, about 120 every year. We get 95% compliance. We issue just a few notices a year, so we are getting very high levels of compliance without issuing notices, which is wonderful news. And we have quite a large number of currently open or open cases currently, but we are quite effective in moving those forward. And another item that we deal with is zoning bylaw compliance. And so these are ensuring that community standards set out in the zoning bylaw are something that are met in our neighborhoods. And the bylaw officer identifies the compliance issue and works with the property owner to comply and connects them with the appropriate staff to get their issue resolved. Let's say if they need to go through a planning approval application or something. Again, we have pretty decent compliance rates. And we have a larger number of cases than we would typically do in a year. We usually have about 25 or 35 cases a year, and we close about 25 of them per year. So in conclusion, I just wanted to share, with our advocacy with legislation over the number of years and the active cases and programs that we do have, we are leading the way. We have led advocacy for better legislation to deal with these safety and community issues. We've educated other municipalities. We train them, we teach them, we share our experiences. Other municipalities that have programs or who have worked through some of these dangerous and unsightly or vacant building cases, we've led the way and have shared our experiences with them to help them through those programs. But our goal is always voluntary compliance. We try to get the owners to do what they need to do to make sure that they're in compliance with the bylaws. Our end goal is not getting a fine or going to court. It's to get these things done before we ever get to that point. And, but we do take formal actions if and when required. But we do have a pretty successful program with a small team. And that is it for me. I'm happy to take questions And like I said, Ben Purinton will be talking about the community enhancement program next.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Director Poffenroth. So first up is Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Director Poffenroth. I just want to thank you and your team for this. This is a major file for us. It keeps us in a growth-ready position the more we can resolve these cases. And I guess there's a couple of questions that I have around the support that your department needs to continue this. So just a couple of things that stuck out to me. They all really revolve around this question is, do we have enough staff to keep this up and to go further? The ones that really stuck out to me were the yearly average on unsightly premises. We have 295 open cases, 120 resolved cases. As things, I guess, what's the trajectory here with the increasing population? I know we're cleaning up some of these buildings, but it's hard for me to see if the department has the support it needs. I mean, we're in budget deliberations, so I know you would have had those conversations, but help me understand how we're meeting those demands.
Yes, through your chair. It's a great question. Some of the numbers of cases, just FYI, on the slides you saw with respect to zoning and unsightly, we have an unusually high number right now. We're trying to figure out what that means. We are resolving many cases. In the case of unsightly premise, we're really knocking it out of the park with the amount of voluntary compliance. I mean, with respect to resources, it's really a budget and council discussion. Part of the budget discussion is around this community services reserve, and we will be coming back with some ideas around that with respect to that reserve when the reserve is policy is drafted and is ready for that discussion around this table. So, I think it's a great discussion and one that we'll have in the coming months.
So, and maybe this is a question for you as well, Commissioner, or does the unsightly premises one specifically, and the minimum standards are a bit different because I know you're working with building inspectors there, but around lot cleanup, tidiness, and whatnot, does the unsightly premises, when we have a notice go out, does that go to Local 18 as a work order, or what's the relation? Or does the department have its own team that kind of deals with? How's that relationship work?
That's a great question. When we're ready to do a cleanup, which in most cases we don't have to because the owner cleans up, but when we do have to clean up, we do work with the Public Works team, and it's the Local 18 crews that do the cleanups. In the most cases, they're doing it, and they do a great job.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, over to Mayor Reardon.
You. Amy, I'm just wondering, when I went through there, I had a question the same as Councillor Harris's, but I noticed that a lot of them, it's the number of cases out almost equals the number of cases in. So I'm just even wondering is if we sort of keep on to that, if the public will become more aware that we are keeping on to it, if we see that will over time reduce for one thing, but I guess you said we had an unusual, more of an influx of it recently. The other question I had is, we know what a vacant building is, and in the minimum standards that you provided in your slides, there's 8 bullets. So is it any one of those bullets that would be then consider a building dangerous? Is it all 8 of them, like going forward?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Your Worship. The list that presented on the slide around minimum standards was just to give you a snapshot of some of the things that we look for. The standard that we apply is a provincial one, plus we have additional items in our bylaw. There's a very long list of things that we check for. And when our inspectors are out, we are determining whether this is something that we need to handle under the minimum property standards program, meaning we issue a notice ordering the property owner to address these maintenance items, or is it something that we need to look at under a different program? But the main difference is minimum standards is for occupied dwellings. The vacant building program is obviously vacant. So that's sort of the difference in the programs. But if there is a situation that is dangerous, we have other tools that we can
Right, and I guess I was
use.
looking at what's the label? You're now dangerous and not just vacant. That's a different label, isn't it? Between vacant and dangerous. So,
Absolutely.
like, what's the line, I guess, you're crossing?
Yes, so
For most instances, just generally speaking.
yeah, the line between a vacant and a dangerous building. The legislation is very clear about when we would consider a building dangerous, and it has to be a hazard to public safety. So it has to be dilapidated to the point of being a hazard to the public, or it has to be structurally unsound to the point of being a hazard to the public. So you may have a building that is in very rough shape, but really it's not a hazard to public safety. And when Ben comes with his next presentation, we're going to talk about the idea around unsightly repair, like how do we address those buildings that don't hit that target of hazardous? Because we know what to do with a hazardous building.
Yeah, okay.
But
I could
when
also,
you're-
I was going to say, I could also have a Boeing brick wall that I don't know is dangerous, and that could just collapse like we've seen recently, so.
Yes, well, Your Worship, we have dealt with cases of questionable walls or brick walls, and we will deal with those under a dangerous situation, and we will assess those and determine what category it fits into.
Right. And who determines unsightly, what's unsightly? You said, well, weeds wouldn't be unsightly. I know in some communities, I think Halifax, weeds are unsightly if they get to be too tall.
Yeah, Your Worship, the legislation is clear about what unsightly is, and I'm not sure what their legislation says in Nova Scotia, but there are other municipalities in New Brunswick that may have a bylaw that talk about the length of your grass. And that is a different issue. Unsightly is very specific under the legislation. But I mean, you could have a bylaw about weeds and grass and
I'm
different
not ready
things.
to go there yet, but I'm just curious.
Well, then,
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, over to Deputy Mayor McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Amy, for coming in. We've come so far since 2012. I mean, it's amazing how well we're doing. But a couple of questions come to mind, okay? And I get these in the neighborhoods, like city cleanups. You say here in the yearly average for community standards, we do 1 to 2. So is there a timeline, like if a neighbor complains, look, he's got 20 bags of garbage out there and, he's not doing anything. Is there a timeline between that, when that phone call is made and we actually clean it up?
Through you, Chair. I don't know if there's really a set timeline, Deputy, but I mean, something like that you're describing, like a garbage bag situation, our community standards officer gets out right away, and usually he can resolve that pretty quickly. But you know what the time frame is when our community standards officer says, okay, I'm not getting any luck here, I need to go to the next step? We would talk about that in the office, but we're quite effective in getting some of those quick hits done quite quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when we talk about a compliance rate, okay, so we have a 95% compliance rate. And I know there's different, not every case is the same.
That's
okay?
right.
So on average, if you just took a, top of the head guess, what would be your timeline for compliance? So, somebody's put on notice that, look, things got to change here, and so if you had 100 cases, would 50% of those cases change like within 6 months,
Oh.
a year, 2 years?
Thank you. I just conferred with Pamela, who's the manager. I mean, the snappy, relatively simpler ones usually would be resolved in a couple weeks or a month, Deputy. Things that are more complicated, or the owner, perhaps they're not around, or they're difficult to get a hold of, or it's really a large project, it may be a number of months, 4 to 5 months, depending if it's a really large case. But we're getting things done in 2 to 4 weeks for the snappy kind of quick ones that we can work with people.
Okay, well, I just want to end on a positive note. I'm really impressed by how far we've come on this file, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, Councillor Lowe.
Under minimum standards, Amy, heat's not listed, but I think you mentioned it, right?
Yeah.
To me, it's the most important item a house could have, heat. So I represent 3 priority neighborhoods, so heat's very important. Is it the same homeowners that the problems are coming from the same time? I think I know the answer before I even ask you. But the question is, can you name them? That's the problem. Are you allowed to say who the slum landlord is that won't turn the heat on for people that are paying rent in some of these apartments that are over 4 apartments per unit? Are you allowed to name the landlords?
So just a few things on that, Madam Chair. Heat is an item that is in the provincial code that we do adopt. So heat, running water, all rodent-free, garbage-free, clean, things like that is included. In short, no, we can't give names unless we've issued a notice to comply. Once a notice to comply is issued, it is a public document. We post it on the building, we serve it, and it is public information, and then we would share. But we deal with all sorts of property owners, all kinds and all different property owners, and people in different situations as well as to why they find themselves in the situation that they're in.
So the answer is no.
Unless the notice to comply has been issued, which is a formal document, a public document, then we could
Yeah, I
share the
mean, like,
name.
most of these buildings have over 4 apartments, which means it's private contractor picking up the garbage, right?
Yes.
But my concern is heat, the quality of heat, how much heat, like, they can control furnace heat. They take thermostats off so people can't, turn the heat up. And if we all know now, heat is a cost factor, whether it's oil or whatever it is. But I'm just curious whether you can name them. We do. We name them to the neighbors next door. I mean, I can list them all right here. I'll probably go to jail, but I mean, like, it'd be nice if the city could name them, whether they would embarrass them, but that's what's happened out there now. I mean, people are renting for X number of dollars and they don't have sufficient heat. And they have kids in the building and stuff like that. That's my answer. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And just a note on that, I guess, there is a minimum heat that they have to maintain. And one thing that you're going to hear in the next presentation is improvements to the minimum property standards program that we're proposing, or things that we're already about to undertake. And it's moving away from just a complaint basis. Once a tenant phones us, if they know to phone us, and if they're comfortable in phoning us, because they're worried often to phone us. So we are looking at taking a more proactive approach. And we, if we hear that there are concerns in certain buildings with respect to heat or a minimum standard whatsoever, if we had that information, we would check out that building. It doesn't have to be a tenant. It doesn't have to be an agent, somebody from a different agency, or it doesn't have to be us. We will take a complaint and take a look at it. But we are looking at different ways to get to the buildings that need the most help. Because if we wait for a tenant to call us, it's probably too late. They've probably given their notice and they're moving out, or their condition is really quite dire. We'd like to get to those buildings before they're in that situation. So that's what we're looking at undertaking right away.
Thank you so much, Director. Yeah, this is one piece of the pie when it comes to all of these initiatives, right? So I really appreciated you giving us where we're at now, so we can now hear sort of where we're going. So with that, I'll take a motion to receive and file the presentation. Councilor Harris and Deputy Mayor on the question. All those in favor? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're moving on to part 2. The Community Enhancement Project with Ben Purinton. Oh, sorry, I do this all the time. First, though, we're going to have Commissioner Hamilton introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Growth Committee. So I'd like to introduce Ben Purinton, who will be providing a presentation this afternoon on the recommended community enhancement project. And by way of background, this was an initiative that began earlier this year, really out of the direction from Common Council, who identified resources in the 2022 budget to undertake the project. This is an important initiative of Council's. And as part of the process, staff undertook a holistic evaluation of all of our property-related bylaw compliance programs, with the goal to enhancing those so that we can have a greater impact on the community, to better achieve council priorities, and to align our efforts with our neighborhood planning initiatives, as well as your recently endorsed Affordable Housing Action Plan. So you'll hear today there are a variety of enhancements being recommended, and they're really meant to support your growth outcomes, as well as to develop more livable neighborhoods in St. John. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Ben to deliver today's presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner Hamilton. Good afternoon to the Chair and members of the Growth Committee. Today I'll be providing an overview of the Community Enhancement Project that has been ongoing throughout 2022. The Community Enhancement Project began in 2022 when Common Council dedicated additional resources to Growth and Community Services to undertake the project. Under this project, we undertook a holistic evaluation of property and community standards to identify areas of opportunity and achieve multiple desired outcomes. Those desired outcomes include having a greater impact on Council's priorities through our bylaw compliance programs, synergizing compliance efforts with the strategic direction at the city, including neighborhood planning initiatives and affordable housing action items. And it also took an in-depth look at where there are opportunities to improve our programs and how we can capitalize on those opportunities. It also incorporated some advocacy efforts from Councillor Harris, including his recommendation on a vacant building tax and advocacy surrounding the city's ability to repair. To achieve these desired outcomes, we defined 3 project goals. These goals include developing a community-based approach, facilitating compliance, and enhancing enforcement. The first goal, developing a community-based approach, looked at how we could refocus our compliance programs so that we prioritize areas where where cases have a greater impact on residents, and also ensure compliance efforts as a whole are cohesively focused on driving change in specific communities. It includes improvements such as defining focus areas that will have an increased level of importance within our programs with the goal of driving overall change, reprioritization of our compliance programs to further prioritize those focus areas, establishing program coordination meetings between staff to foster a team-based approach in driving change in specific neighborhoods, and also looking to strengthen our relationships with community-based groups. As compliance work in these areas progress, we'll be looking for opportunities where we may be able to work together with community groups to achieve common goals. The second goal, facilitating compliance, is focused on generating solutions that may allow voluntary compliance to take place. Currently, we work extensively with property owners to see bylaw issues addressed without the need of formal enforcement action, and generally have great success in doing so. Achieving voluntary compliance reduces the amount of formal resources spent on formal enforcement action and allows for better outcomes on properties. However, enforcement cases can require different solutions to allow voluntary compliance to take place, and these solutions are crucial to address properties earlier on in the enforcement process. Under this goal, it includes improvements such as the expanded developer notification list, which allows us to offer that program in all areas of property bylaw compliance and not just on vacant buildings. Expansion of the beautification grant to the north end for 2023. And also as part of this goal, the Urban Development Incentive Program is scheduled to undergo a review during 2023. Upon completion of that review, the Improved Incentives Program will also assist in these efforts. The final goal of enhancing enforcement is where the bulk of the work under this project went. As part of this goal, property compliance was evaluated from top to bottom, beginning from when a property begins to deteriorate, all the way to where it becomes abandoned or demolished. We looked at all areas where we have opportunities to improve, how we can capitalize on those opportunities, and what other municipalities do in some of these situations. We have a list of recommended changes, some that could be further enhanced with additional resources, although not required to implement, and others that require legislative change. We've broken these improvements and recommendations up into 3 different categories as they each relate to different overall areas where we can improve compliance efforts. The first area is preventing deterioration. What more can we do to ensure a building does not experience deterioration in the first place? The second is disincentivizing vacancy. Under the Dangerous and Vacant Building Program, non-hazardous vacant buildings are difficult to enforce, and in some cases are left vacant long-term. And the third is addressing abandonment. We have significant difficulty in dealing with abandoned buildings. They often end up being demolished, and we looked at how abandonment issues can better be addressed. From here, I'll be going through each of these improvements in detail. Some of these improvements sync with action items under the Affordable Housing Action Strategy, and I'll highlight those as we progress. In terms of preventing deterioration, we have good tools to do so through our minimum property standards program that enforces proper maintenance and safety standards on rental properties throughout St. John. Currently, the minimum property standards program is complaint-based, and due to the complaint-based nature of the program, some properties are not addressed until the building has already experienced deterioration. This is because in some cases, tenants do not make complaints until already deteriorated conditions worsen, and in other cases, tenants can be fearful of making a complaint. If the minimum property standards program is to be used to its full potential to enforce maintenance standards on buildings throughout the city, the program will need to move forward from a complaint-based approach and take a more proactive role in the community. This will include conducting more formal enforcement action and conducting inspections throughout focus areas to generate new cases without relying on complaints. Additional resources would allow Growth and Community Services to enhance these efforts. Enhancing the minimum property standards program with a combination of a proactive and complaint-based approach will allow for maintenance standards to be enforced earlier on in the process. This would ensure that housing throughout the community remains safe, could prevent buildings from falling into decay, and could mitigate the potential loss of housing stock. I'd like to note that additional enforcement of the minimum property standards was identified as an action item under the Affordable Housing Action Plan's implementation strategy to help maintain housing stock. As for disincentivizing vacancy, there are 3 different opportunities that we've evaluated. The first is financial penalties. A lot of municipalities throughout Canada apply financial penalties to vacant building owners, and they typically come in 2 different forms. The first is a vacant building tax that is a percentage of the building's assessed value, and the second is a permit fee. Owners are required to take out a permit that requires them to meet certain maintenance standards, typically around security. Both of these are good ways to disincentivize vacancy in a community. In New Brunswick, we currently cannot do a tax. We do not have the authority under the legislation to do so. The permit system may be possible. However, there are issues, the main one being collection. Municipalities that typically implement these systems are able to pursue collection by laying the fees on the outstanding property tax bill. In New Brunswick, we're only able to pursue collection by laying charges in provincial court, which is extremely resource intensive. Without legislative change, we can't effectively implement a financial penalty on vacant buildings. However, if legislative changes were made, these penalties would not only disincentivize vacant building ownership, but could also provide the city with increased revenue. We're recommending that these legislative changes be pursued with the province, allowing the city to implement a vacant building tax or establish a permit system that is tied to the property tax system, or potentially do both. Another option to disincentivize vacancy is through an unsightly repair program. This program would use legislation under the LGA that allows the city to repair unsightly conditions on a dilapidated building and charge the cost of the repairs to the property owner. If the bill goes unpaid, the city would be reimbursed for the cost by the province, and the bill would be placed on the outstanding property taxes. The goal of the program would be to provide the city staff with additional enforcement measures without the need for legislative change. A looming city repair would increase owner motivation to address their vacant building, and if repairs did need to move forward, they would improve the aesthetic of the building, addressing some of the negative impacts vacant buildings can cause with respect to community pride. However, conducting repairs will not directly result in resolved cases because we are limited in what we can repair. Simply adding the ability to repair is not enough to drive overall change on vacant buildings throughout the city. It is another tool in our enforcement toolkit, but it is important that we implement this alongside other efforts surrounding vacant buildings, such as financial penalties and an improved tax sale process that I'll discuss later on. I also would like to take the time to clarify when we can repair a building and what we can repair. Under the legislation, we can only repair a building if it falls under certain sections of our unsightly and dangerous buildings bylaw. Those sections are 6.1, unsightly dilapidated, and 6.2, hazardous by reason of being vacant or unoccupied. If a building falls under category 6.3, hazardous by reason of being dilapidated or structurally unsound, we can only demolish. We can also pursue fines in court under all 3 of these offenses, and I'll discuss this later on. If we repair under 6.1, unsightly dilapidated, we can only repair the dilapidated conditions that cause the building to be unsightly. This might include things like peeling paint, broken or boarded windows, and missing siding. If we repair under 6.2, hazardous vacant, We can only repair the conditions that cause the building to be a hazard by reason of being vacant. This would restrict us to only being able to secure the building. Due to these limitations, repair is not the entire solution and needs to be implemented alongside additional efforts. We can pilot this program in 2023 to get started on some of these efforts, but we need to pursue additional changes from the province if we want to see overall change with respect to vacancy. The final improvement in terms of disincentivizing vacancy is court proceedings for vacant buildings. So under existing legislation, the city can pursue fines against property owners in provincial court if a notice to comply expires. This could be used to issue notices on vacant buildings and pursue fines if the owner does not comply. Fines range from $240 to $10,200 and can be applied each day the offense occurs. However, it is important to note that a judge will often elect for the minimum fine, especially in the case of a first offense. Furthermore, pursuing this action is extremely resource intensive. Given the resourcing challenges and the limited fine amounts, this would need to be used in selective circumstances. However, going forward, this option will be pursued beginning in 2023. Finally, in terms of addressing abandonment, a tool that could be used to deal with abandoned buildings is tax sale. When an owner has not paid their property taxes, the property can be sold at tax sale auction to the highest bidder. This provides a direct solution to deal with abandoned buildings, as in most cases, the taxes are not being paid. However, this is a provincial process, and the process length often allows for excessive deterioration to occur at vacant buildings before they are sold at tax sale. In a lot of cases, demolition occurs prior to tax sale. Furthermore, the province's disposal process with respect to unpurchased property is also lengthy. When a property goes to tax sale, it must sell for the taxes outstanding at minimum. When there are no bidders, the province purchases the property for the outstanding tax amount and then disposes of it. It can often take an additional 3 years or longer from when the property is purchased by the province at tax sale to when it is disposed of by their Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. The tax sale and disposal processes are also negatively impacting abandoned vacant lots. The tax sale process is necessary to free up land that could be redeveloped, and these extended timelines are delaying potential redevelopments at these sites. This is most notable on land that the city has previously demolished vacant buildings on. It is recommended that the City of St. John advocate that the province of New Brunswick make changes to address abandoned properties more efficiently through their tax sale process. Also, affordable housing could be prioritized through changes to this process, and it is recommended that those opportunities be evaluated as well. Another option that we've investigated is receivership programs. These programs allow municipalities to take title from negligent vacant property owners without providing compensation. In New Brunswick, there is not legislation that currently allows for taking title without compensating the owner. We're not recommending that we pursue this at this time, as we feel the issues that this could potentially address can be better sorted out through improvements to the tax sale process, as well as additional vacant building efforts. However, we could consider pursuing this at a later date, specifically if changes to the tax sale process are not able to occur. So to summarize the recommendations, in 2023, we recommend that Common Council endorse the following changes. Begin work on enhancing our minimum property standards program, pilot the unsightly repair program conditional on aggressive pursuit of legislative changes, begin pursuing court action on a select number of vacant buildings. And we're also recommending that the following changes be pursued with the province. Legislative changes to allow for an effective vacant building tax and/or a vacant building permit linked to the property tax system, and improvements to the tax sale process to better address abandonment. With the improvements developed under the Community Enhancement Project, staff anticipate improved service levels both under the Dangerous and Vacant Building and Minimum Property Standards programs with no additional resources required. As a result of the improvements, we anticipate seeing an additional 10 cases resolved per year under both programs. Further improvements that can be achieved with additional resources are currently being evaluated, and a recommendation on increased resources to these programs is expected in early 2023, concurrent with the meeting on the Growth Reserve Fund. With the improvements and recommended changes developed under the Community Enhancement Project, the city will be in much better position and have a variety of tools to intervene earlier on in the enforcement process. This will prevent deterioration, reduce vacancy, and reduce the need for city demolitions. These improvements will allow for future growth, create safe, livable neighborhoods, and cultivate community pride, and also prevent loss of housing stock to ensure long-term affordability. And with that concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions on the project.
All right, you'll be shocked to know it's Councillor Harris is up first on this one.
Thank you, Chair. Ben, that was wonderful. Your report, I take it, I'm just curious, did you write the 32-page report on this?
Through you, the chair, I did.
That is a great report, very high level, and it really qualifies a lot of the assumptions that I personally came in with, but had no necessary data to suggest that it was all true or what assumptions weren't true, and really flushes out a way forward. So I'm really, really happy with this. I do have a couple of questions just for my own comprehension. On page 9 of the report, you lay out this dangerous vacant building program case status, and Director Poffenroth pointed to it in her presentation. In 2017, we had about 60 units that were progressing toward demolition, and 100 and some, almost 20 that were salvageable. We have a similar amount of buildings that are salvageable today, but much lower on the demolition level. Do we know out of that, do we have any sense on how long they'll be salvageable before? Because I know this is going to need a runway to really take off. And I know we have a 1-year pilot with this innovative repair, it's really a right to repair piece of legislation that we're trying to act on. Yeah, just curious on that, what the percentage might be of those that are imminent and, yeah.
Through you, the chair, to the councillor. So the progressing to demolition tab that we have, those 25 buildings, those are ones that we anticipate being demolished within the next 5 years with no action from if no action was taken by the city. So everything on the salvageable tab would be 6+ years.
Okay.
Right? So we have there is definitely some time to address those buildings. Right?
That's great, okay. And then, yeah, love the idea of, the idea that standing buildings are the greenest buildings we have, right? They have this embedded energy. I feel like there's a case to be made there, for action on our housing file as well. I mean, I know that's going to get flushed out with some of the advocacy we do at the provincial level. So I guess from a strategic perspective, do we have a sense on the scope of advocacy the city is going to need to do and what that might entail? I mean, I know we would have partners at 8 cities. Have we had those discussions yet? Out of
Through
curiosity.
you, the chair, I'm going to refer that question to Director Poffenroth.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Chair, to Councillor Harris. I mean, it's a great question, and the advocacy piece, we're going to do a bit more work on if Growth Committee is supportive today. And then if the recommendations do get forwarded to council around that advocacy piece, then we're going to do a bit more work around that and see what that looks like, how we would map that out. So that we can be as aggressive as possible and still meet other objectives that the city has around advocacy.
And just to follow up, I know I'm over time, Chair, so feel free to cut me off if you want me to come back for a second round.
Let's come back for a second round and we'll
Okay.
do Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ben, thanks for this. This is, as Councilor Harris said, an awesome report, and we're making so much headway. And we talked about, timelines. I asked Amy Poffenroth about timeline. And I think that we're up against an obstacle here with the provincial government and legislation. It really hinders our ability to clean up the city. Like a tax sale on a building can take 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And meanwhile, the building's falling down. And then the cost, if you do something and the cost goes on the property, well, if the property's not worth anything, how are you going to cost recover, right? Whether it's the province or the city. So I think that one of the big things that I think in this that, is going to make a change is our approach with the provincial government to change legislation. Mm-hmm. And I think with municipal reform, coming now, I think this is something that really has to be in there to give us the ability because, we can want to clean up the city as much as possible, but we've got this big hindrance with this legislation. So excellent report. I think you did a great job and look forward to seeing the changes in 23.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. It'll be quick. The DTI buildings piece you guys outline on page, I'm trying to find it, I remember reading it. Addressing abandonment, I believe it's, when we talk about land banks, tax sale, I think it's page 16. Do we have an idea how many buildings is DTI sitting on right now that are just sitting empty, that they own because they didn't sell at tax sale?
Through you, the chair, to the counselor, it varies as time progresses, kind of thing. I remember at one point in time, I think on the vacant building list, there was maybe as many as 20 to 25 that were either in the tax sale, like needed to go to tax sale, or were owned by DTI or Department of Finance, like as they transfer through that process. But I think right now it might be around 15, so about 10% of the list, like either needs to go to tax sale or needs to be disposed of by DTI.
Yeah.
And I also would like to highlight the vacant land piece as well. Like we really don't have good data on how much land is out there that needs this process, but there's quite a bit. And just based on the numbers of demolitions that we've done, all those lots still need tax sale, and we estimate that there's probably between 40 and 50, right? Just on the ones that we've done demolitions on that need to go through this process. That's not including things that are just abandoned pieces of land, right? So.
And that leads me to my second point. I mean, first of all, that's a big problem, that DTI is sitting on idle assets in a housing crisis. You know, it's something I think we really should flag to Minister Shepherd to get social development and housing to really call down the road to say, hey, if you guys are sitting on buildings, we've got money to spend to repair them for public housing. But beyond that, is there merit in getting vacant land as a consideration piece? I know we're talking about a vacant buildings tax. We need to advocate for that tax to be done, or a registry for vacant buildings. That makes sense. If you need a permit to make your building vacant, okay, that's a way of recovering the servicing cost. So land may not park there, but I'm just curious if there's consideration for that, if we can pursue that.
Through you, the chairs, it wasn't something that we considered when we were looking into the project, as it wasn't really related to that property, especially with land, that property bylaw compliance piece, right? It is something that we could investigate more moving forward, so.
Yeah, because if it's, as you say, if we've got a lot of this vacant land and there's anything we can tie to that tax to free up the land, that would be brilliant. And finally, do we have an idea of what the ask might be financially for the Growth Reserve Fund to resource some of this, or is that still being flushed out?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Yeah, still being fleshed out. I mean, we're going to have discussion around the policy and where Growth Committee would like to go with that reserve. And then what we'll do in conjunction with that discussion is through the Community Enhancement Project, we'll come back with some options with various service levels as part of that discussion. So then Growth Committee can think about, you know, if I allot this much to it, this is what we'll achieve, et cetera. So, yeah, we are putting our heads to that, and we'll come back together with the policy piece.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So I actually have a question as well. So I'm just wondering if you, on the second recommendation that we aggressively pursue with the province, do we need, or maybe we can wait for the next time it comes to council? I'm just making sure that we have enough sort of action in there for what is going to happen. And to me, it's sort of like, will we see recommendations come from you with suggestions for the province and how they may update it or what they may consider, and to sort of map that out? And would we need to throw that in the motion to make sure that happens?
Yeah, so we will take some time. So the idea is, we're thinking that the recommendations that need to go from Growth to council, maybe early in January or sometime in January, we'll map out what the advocacy piece looks like and put some thought to if anything needs to be added. I don't think it will be, but we're going to put our heads to that a little bit.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great to go with specifics to those folks for sure. So thank you. All right. Is everyone, any more questions today? No? Councilor, good. All right, so would I have someone who's willing to move staff recommendation? Okay, Mayor Reardon, second by Councilor Harris. On the question, all those in favor? Okay, thank you, everyone. Now, on to our next item is the Affordable Housing Grant Program, and Jacqueline Hamilton is going to kick us off.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair and members of the Growth Committee. We are pleased to be before you this afternoon to recommend the launch of a new affordable housing grant program. These recommendations are intended to action the city's affordable housing plan and really are aimed at increasing the supply of affordable housing within the city. Importantly, they do align with the plan's direction to target support to non-market housing in order to provide much-needed access to housing to those in the greatest need. The program parameters were developed in consultation with Growth Committee. You will recall we were back before you in July of this year, as well as the not-for-profit housing sector and industry. We are joined today by Andrew Reed, who is the lead of the Affordable Housing Action Plan, and Jennifer Brown, who was the consultant with Dillon Consultant that helped shape the recommendations before you. And I would add that this new program is intended to work together with program support from other levels of government, including the federal government and provincial government, in order to accelerate the supply of affordable housing. So today we are seeking a recommendation from Growth Committee to Council in order to position the city to launch this program for early in the new year. So with that, I will turn things over to Mr. Reed.
Thank you, Commissioner Hamilton, and good afternoon, members of Growth Committee and Chair. It's very exciting to be back before you to present the finalized grant program policy. So we know there's a documented need for more affordable housing units in St. John. As you recall, in this fall, Common Council adopted the Affordable Housing Action Plan, and action number 13 of that plan was to seek the immediate establishment of the Affordable Housing Grant Fund. As you recall, back in July, we had Jennifer Brown here from Dillon Consulting presenting you with 3 options for this housing grant program. And finally, I'd mention just regarding the source of this funding, it is coming from a portion of transit and housing funding that was allocated back in the summer towards the Affordable Housing Action Plan. So in terms of the program we're presenting today, the policy statement is that the purpose of the Affordable Housing Grant Program is to increase the number of affordable rental units on the city's housing market and ensure those units remain affordable long-term. So this policy program was developed based on the 3 options, the preliminary option being the per unit. We have gone forward with that option. And this policy was developed in coordination with not only our housing action team, also with the Department of Social Development and other city staff. So to summarize the program kind of at the outset, essentially it's really about increasing the number of affordable units. So it's a top-up grant program exclusively for projects that are already eligible for provincial or federal programs. The program will only provide funding towards affordable units. So if there's a mixed-use proposal, which is eligible under the Department of Social Development, only those units which meet the minimum depths of affordability and targets would be funded. With this program, we are estimating, with the funds available, it could support the creation of between 30 and 60 units. So there's 2 tiers that you'll see within the policy, similar to the way the province gives greater weight towards nonprofit development. If it is a nonprofit organization applying, it would be $10,000 per affordable unit up to a maximum of $200,000. And that amount is slightly less for a private developer. But I would emphasize that unit has to be defined as an affordable unit, be it a nonprofit developer or a private developer. As well, there's an additional $50,000 available in bonus funds, which we've identified for market gap solutions. So we have experience with from our past development incentives programs or beautification grant programs, with how to run the program. The means we've settled on is a grant cycle. And this is to ensure that the best projects are prioritized, essentially. So the program would open after, should Growth Committee move forward and council would open 90 days, would open upon adoption, it would run for 90 days, and that would be cycle 1. After that, there would be subsequent cycles. And the funds would be committed during the second and subsequent grant cycles previous to that cycle closing. In terms of the disbursement of grant funds, all of these items here would be eligible costs. We have made a few special inclusions here. We did feel it was important to include soft costs such as design, as well as the shared amenity costs, which sometimes aren't actually covered within the other levels of government's programs. So we're always seeking to add some value while being very flexible, knowing our local actors, knowing our local conditions. The grant, to ensure that we're mitigating risk, it would only be awarded upon issuance of the occupancy permit for the project and confirmation that all the criteria has been met. So if there were substantial revisions to the building permit, if the project substantially changed, that could potentially void or require the grant to be resubmitted. In terms of project eligibility requirements, I'll just run through these here quick for you, but we did want to prioritize project readiness. We know with the provincial and federal programs, timeliness is a real theme. There are timelines associated with many of those funding applications. So we do prioritize projects where zoning and approvals are already in place. We do require that building permits are submitted ideally with the application, but we do allow them to be submitted within 12 months. Projects must be located in the serviced area of the city. They must be located within an intensification area in accordance with the municipal plan or within a kilometer of a transit stop. And projects must provide proof of funding from provincial, federal partners and confirmation of funds through their bank. So in terms of those grant cycles, there would be a grant committee that meets at the end of cycle 1, reviews the applications, and prioritizes them by score. They would meet as needed for additional cycles. This would be the composition you can see on this slide. It would be made up of staff. So in terms of that evaluation criteria, the weighting of the criteria would be primarily by the number of units created. That's 1 point per unit, the location, and the readiness. There is bonus criteria, which comes in addition to those bonus funds, and that would be dependent on things like 3-bedroom unit creation or certain forms which seek to address what's been called the missing middle, a townhouse, additional points for retrofitting buildings. So you can see how that would work with the community enhancement program, accessibility, as well as energy efficiency, which is a very important consideration for depth and long-term affordability. In terms of the monitoring and evaluation of the program, at the end of the first cycle, staff would provide an update to Growth Committee, and that update would provide the total number of affordable units that have been applied for, the breakdown of unit structure, and the estimated timeline for construction and occupancy. Happy here today to take any questions, and as well as Commissioner Hamilton noted, we do have Jennifer Brown here as well. I would emphasize that there is an importance of timeliness with the grant program, knowing especially federal programs such as the Rapid Housing Initiative have deadlines that are coming up. But at the end of the day, we want to ensure that the committee understands, is comfortable with the program. And so, again, happy to take any questions on it.
Okay, Councilor Harris.
Thank you. Just one question from me. Is there, I see in the input from other service areas and stakeholders with this grant policy piece and the rest of it, that we did reach out to a few different housing provider stakeholders. It's been reviewed by staff. I guess I'm wondering, one of the things, when we brought the motion back in May 25th, one of the items for consideration on the suite of housing policies for recommendation, 4 of which we've heard back from today, was right of first refusal. And I can see the dovetailing here where we're giving preferential treatment to the nonprofit sector. I'm just wondering if that gap could or should be bigger than an 8,000, 10,000 split. Is there merit to making that gap wider? Is there any consideration for that? In my opinion, the private sector has far more capacity to leverage other sources of funding than the nonprofit sector does. So I'm just trying to get that balance right to try to equalize that, I guess, or trying to understand how we can equalize that with this. Because I think everything else within the grant program is good, and the fund level is good. I wonder about that differential. So I'm happy to take feedback or thoughts on that, or from other council if there was any agreement to that, but.
Through the chair to the councillor, I can provide a comment. If there's other follow-up, happy to hear it. But in developing a grant program, it's a very good question because it is a bit of an art and a science. You do have to subscribe to figures at the end of the day. When we did the developer consultation, and Jennifer can speak to this more, we were inclusive of both private sector and nonprofit interests. Having said that, working closely with nonprofit organizations, we know that the majority will come through that stream. And we do think the balance is the right one and it's consistent with provincial programs, but that's sort of where we were coming from with those figures.
Commissioner Hamilton?
I just add on to that question, I guess, a couple of points for me. First of all, I think we are sort of focusing on the not-for-profit sector through a lot of additional mechanisms around specifically the Rapid Housing Initiative. And I think it's important to remember that with the aggressive supply that's needed, in our target set in the Affordable Housing Action Plan, it specifically calls out the need to incent the private sector to deliver on non-market housing, which we haven't really seen a lot of in St. John as of late. So I think it's really important to provide, I think we feel we struck the right balance there through consultation with our partners, and I guess time will tell. This is the first time with this program. We're going to be monitoring the uptake. There's 2 cycles to this, and certainly we will be reporting back to Growth Committee if there's any further adjustments that are needed.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense to me on that front too. We do want our private sector developers to start doing work in that non-market housing sector. So if this is a way to equalize that, I get it. So thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Any other questions from committee? Okay, so I'll take a motion to pass the staff recommendation. Mover, Deputy McKenzie and Mayor Reardon. On the question, all those in favor? All right, motion carried. Thank you very much. Okay, back to the agenda here. Okay, so we're on to item 7, which is referrals from Common Council to the Growth Committee. So first up is a referral from Andrew Johnson, which is, I believe, a letter. I'm just gonna, it's a request for Envision St. John proposal, so I'll take any. Okay, moved by Mayor Reardon. Councilor Harris, do you have a question?
It's on the agenda.
Commissioner Hamilton?
So I can just speak to this briefly. So this was a request from a citizen that went forward to council and then was referred on to Growth Committee, and it was for additional analysis related to the economic value of our heritage areas, specifically targeted towards Envision St. John. So we did provide a recommendation under 7.1 in your kit that this item be referred to Envision St. John for their consideration.
Oh, okay, I'm seeing it now. Yeah, thanks, yeah.
Okay, so moved. Or do you want to speak? Or second it? Okay, great, thanks. On the question, all those in favor? Okay, aye. Okay, item 7.2, Fundy Tennis Association, a request to present. The recommendation is to direct staff to schedule a presentation with Growth Committee. Mayor Reardon and Councillor Harris, on the question, all those in favor? Okay. Item 7.3, a letter from C. Stevenson on dangerous and vacant buildings list with the recommendation to direct staff to contact the applicant and share information on the city's compliance and enforcement programs. Mayor Reardon, Deputy Mayor, on the question, all those in favor? Great. Item 5.4, we have We Believe St. John, a request to present. The recommendation is direct staff to schedule a presentation with Growth Committee. On the question, Mayor Reardon, Councillor Harris, on the question, all those in favor? Aye, thank you. All right, with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Harris,